Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. Instead of the usual history lesson, we're going to step back and look at the early days of North America through the eyes of a foreign observer. Think of the entire continent as this massive, high-stakes geopolitical chessboard where distant European empires were fiercely maneuvering for ultimate control.
Now, we all know the story of this era is often heavily romanticized, right? But honestly, we have to ask a pretty provocative question here. Was this really a narrative about the noble pursuit of liberty, or, at its core, was it fundamentally just a brutal, prolonged European power struggle for resources and global dominance? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this.
Here's the game plan for today. First, we'll set up the New World as a chessboard. Then, we'll look at the race of European powers, followed by settlements and the triangle trade. After that, we'll cover the tragic impact on native populations, dive into the imperial wars, and finally, look at England's ultimate dominance. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The New World, a Chessboard.
So, right off the bat, it's crucial to remember that long before 1492, this land was absolutely not empty. You had these incredibly complex, sophisticated Native American societies governing vast regions. I mean, for thousands of years, they were trading, making peace, fighting wars. They were entirely sovereign peoples. And then, quite suddenly, they found themselves turned into literal pawns by this massive wave of European colonization.
All right, Section 2. The race of European powers.
As the colonization race kicked off, it's fascinating to see how incredibly different the competitors' motivations actually were. It wasn't just a monolith. You had Spain aggressively pushing through the south, completely obsessed with resource extraction and finding gold. France, on the other hand, went north to lock down the highly lucrative fur trade and those crucial inland waterways. Meanwhile, the Netherlands set up shop around the Hudson River to expand their trade network. And then there's Inland, whose whole geopolitical strategy was focused on establishing permanent agricultural colonies right along the east coast.
Moving on to Section 3, Settlements and Triangle Trade.
When you look at how these powers operated on the ground, there is a sheer contrast in their strategy. The English approach was literally to plant themselves. They built permanent towns, think Jamestown or Plymouth, to physically hold the territory. The French took a totally different route, relying on a sprawling, flexible network of trading outposts along the rivers. But here's the catch. This fundamental difference in how they claimed the map meant overlapping borders, which inevitably led to some incredibly fierce clashes.
Just to give you a quick idea of the pure commercial mindset at play here, $24. That is the notoriously low price the Dutch West India Company reportedly paid to the Munsee Lenape tribe back in 1624 to purchase the entire island of Manhattan. Crazy, right? For them, it was all about expanding and protecting that trade network, no matter what.
But of course, we have to acknowledge that this booming colonial wealth was powered by a much darker industrial engine. 2 million. That staggering number represents the enslaved African individuals imported to the Americas by 1775. This horrific human toll was the absolute foundation of the triangle trade, shipping enslaved people, sugar, and rum across the Atlantic. Without it, the economic dominance of these colonies literally would not have existed.
Section 4. The Tragedy of Natives. For the Native Americans, the arrival of these warring empires was nothing short of an absolute tragedy. Almost immediately, first contact introduced devastating European diseases like smallpox. And suddenly, you have vast ancestral territories being claimed by distant monarchs who had never even seen the land, totally without consultation. To just survive, native leaders were forced to navigate incredibly complex, constantly shifting alliances. We're talking about local tribes being decimated in proxy conflicts like King Philip's War, while massive, powerful groups like the Iroquois Confederacy found themselves being used as pawns, caught right in the crossfire between French and English forces.
Which brings us to Section 5, the Imperial Wars.
So, this European power struggle over North American territory, it was absolutely relentless. As you can see, we're looking at nearly a century of continuous, brutal conflict. What started as local skirmishes, like King William's War and Queen Anne's War, eventually spiraled into these massive, theater-wide conflicts. The entire continent was basically dragged into the crossfire of European territorial greed.
And it's wild to think how a single spark in the colonies could literally ignite the globe. Picture this. It's 1754, and a young Virginia militia major named George Washington decides to attack a French encampment in the highly disputed Ohio River Valley. That one seemingly small skirmish over totally undefined borders, it essentially set the entire world on fire and kicked off the global 7 Years' War.
And the ultimate cost of that war was just
devastating. 1.4 million. That's the high-end estimate for global casualties from the 7 Years' War. It really hammers home the bloody reality of this era of imperialism. I mean, the fighting stretched from the deep North American wilderness all the way across the ocean to Europe, the Caribbean, and even India.
Finally, Section 6. England's ultimate dominance. So how did England ultimately win the board? Well, a massive reason for their success wasn't actually just military might. It was pure demographics. By 1750, the English colonial population had absolutely boomed to 1.25 million people. At that point, they just had an unstoppable demographic and industrial advantage over those sparsely populated French outposts.
This all culminated in the 1763 Treaty of Paris, which officially redrew the map of the continent. France was forced to cede virtually all of its North American territory to Great Britain, and just like that, the multi-power struggle in the East was essentially over. England had won.
But here's the twist. This massive victory immediately created an entirely new problem. Great Britain now claimed Canada and everything east of the Mississippi, but they completely ignored their Native American allies in the treaty. On top of that, the British Crown was now swimming in debt from this massive global war. To pay for it, they slapped new taxes on the colonies and restricted westward expansion with the Proclamation of 1763. So, almost overnight, England's total victory morphed into a massive administrative and financial crisis.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to wrap things up. By entirely removing the French threat, and then turning right around and heavily taxing their own citizens to pay for the board, did England's absolute victory inevitably plant the very seeds for their own colonies to rebel? It is absolutely fascinating to ponder if achieving total control over the geopolitical chessboard was the exact thing that broke the British Empire apart. Think on that for a bit. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.